Bienvenidos! Today we're going to talk about irregular preterite verbs in Spanish. Irregular preterite verbs are called irregular verbs because they don't follow the rules for spelling. They don't follow the spelling rules for regular preterite verb conjugations. These irregular verbs are irregular in their spelling of the verb stem and of the endings of the verbs. Now these irregular verbs carry no accents on any of the forms. So that's probably a good thing. We don't have to worry about accent marks on any irregular preterite verbs. The stems of these verbs are irregular. That means the verb stem actually changes from the normal spelling of the verb or the verb stem. And we divide these verb stem changes into three categories for irregular verbs. We have J stem, U stem, and I stem categories. Now we'll look at those in a minute, but first I want to show you that also the endings on the verbs, when we conjugate these verbs, are different from regular preterite conjugation endings. And for all of the irregular preterite verbs, these are the endings for yo, tú, vosotros, vosotras, él, ella, usted, and the nosotros and nosotros forms. The J stem and the U and I stem have different endings depending on the type of irregular verb they are. So the J stem verbs for the ustedes, ellos, and ellas form have eron, and the U stem and I stem irregular verbs have ieron. So the only difference is this little I right here. So these are the endings for the irregular preterite verbs. And these are the three categories for the stems for the irregular verbs. Now I have listed here some of the most common irregular preterite verbs in Spanish. So let's look at these stems and see how the stems appear. For J stem verbs, we have traer, that becomes tra. Okay, and see it has a J at the end of the stem. Decir, dij. Conducir, conduj. Traducir, traduj. Producir, produj. Notice that the J stem category of irregular verbs end in a J. So here's an example sentence. ¿Qué nos dijo la profesora la semana pasada? What did the professor tell us last week? There's your J stem verb in the usted, el, ella form. You can see the ending O. So here's the stem D. Okay, there's the stem D. And there's the O from the usted, el, ella form. Okay, so all of these verbs become the stem shown here, and then you would use one of these endings. But if it's the usted, ustedes, ellos, ellas form, then you would use, let's see, this is J stem, so we'd use the eron ending. Now let's look at the U stem changing. We are not stem changing, the U stem category of irregular verbs. Estar becomes estuv, poder becomes pud, uner pus, saber sup, tener tuv, obtener obtuv. So here's our example sentence. Tuve que ir a clase ayer. I had to go to class yesterday. So we have the yo form of tener in the preterite tense. Tener, the stem becomes tu. And then we have the yo form ending a. You can see the yo ending a right here. So, tuve que ir a clase ayer. I had to go to class yesterday. Now the I stems are querer becomes quis. venir, vin, hacer, is. And in hacer, the stem for the ella, el, usted form is is. Sounds the same, but it ends in a z. So we have to pay attention with hacer because it actually has two stems. For all of the forms except the usted, el, ella form, it's HIC. Before the el, ella, usted form, HIZ. Hice mi tarea anoche. I did my homework last night. This is the yo form, so we use is. And we use the yo ending a. So I did my homework last night. Now for haber, we have hubo in the preterite tense. So that's there is and there are, so that means there was. Hubo una boda en la iglesia ayer. There was a wedding in the church yesterday. Now, there are a couple of other irregular preterite tense verbs, ver and dar, and I'm going to show you the conjugations for these two verbs. Dar and ver, just like the other preterite tense verbs, have no accent marks. And actually they're conjugated exactly the same way, except dar begins with a D and ver begins with the letter V. So for the yo form we have D or V. Tú, diste, viste. Usted, el, ella, dio, vio. Nosotros, nosotras. Dimos, vimos. Vosotros, vosotras. Disteis, visteis. Ustedes, ellos, and ellas. Dieron, vieron. An example sentence. ¿Viste una película anoche? Did you see a movie last night? Dimos los regalos en la fiesta ayer. We gave the gifts at the party yesterday. So these are examples of irregular verbs that don't even follow the J stem, I stem, U stem irregular rules.